Well, Happy New Year, Janice. Welcome back.
Happy New Year, Karen. Thanks. It's really good to be back home.
We were both away over the holidays. You were away for an extra long time with your friend's wedding and everything. How exciting.
Yes, for sure.
So you're just back a couple of days. I've been back a week, and obviously it was really busy with the Christmas holidays, and on top of that, your friend's wedding. So it's really been interesting holidays for all of us. How are you doing?
I'm good. It was definitely a nice time away from everything, had that extra long self-care piece, which I really appreciated. But I think like almost like the last few days I was ready to come back home. Just kind of miss, home is home. But I know you were away as well, so I hope you had a good time.
Yeah, I know what you mean though. Like I'm a big traveler, as you know, and I love going away. But yeah, sometimes it is nice just to come home. I did see that post that you posted from top of some mountaintop. Was that in India or?
Yeah, it was in India. It was kind of like a hill station. So it was on top of like this really high fort. I climbed a good amount of steps for sure. It took a while.
Oh my gosh, you climbed up there. That's good. Yeah, traveling is amazing, right? Because we're exposed to such different environments and our energy is completely different. But sometimes it's nice to come home. So
Absolutely.
let's hit the ground running. My idea for today, like I said to you a few minutes ago, I want to call this podcast "The Christmas Gifts We Didn't Expect to Get." And I see this in my own life, certainly see it in our clients' lives. And as I know, at the end of last year, we were talking about kind of not doing resolutions, and I'm seeing that in the media all over the place since you and I did that podcast, by the way, because really it's almost become like an anti-word about resolutions. It's more about intentions. I'm seeing that word more on the media, and I
Mhm.
think that really fit with where we left off last year in terms of kind of doing more of a heartfelt reflection of kind of where we've been in our life and where we want to go next. The jump off point I want to talk to you about today is about what happens when we go home, and what happens when the family of origin dynamics kind of get reactivated, even if we haven't lived at home for a while, even if we haven't seen our family for a while. It's kind of like this unconscious script that just sets in, and we end up kind of reverting back to the old roles that we played in our family. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, on that point, I went back home to India, where my grandparents are, and we did this big family trip where my parents were with us, me, my brother, my fiance, and then as well as my parents live in India. So it's funny that we're talking about this because we had like three generations of extended family all together, and I really started to see how just going back home those dynamics kind of shifted because I saw my parents having to go back to being kids to their moms.
Oh yeah.
And they're grown adults with their own children, but I saw that like how like my grandma felt the need to extra parent when my dad would go out, for example. And like that's like things that my parents do when we come back home. So kind of just seeing that and like going back to adopting those old roles, I really saw that take place in my vacation actually.
Yeah, you had all three generations, and were you all staying
Yeah.
in the same place?
Yeah, all in one house.
And so did you say when your mom went out, your grandmother kind of started parenting him again, or?
My dad, yeah, when my dad went out, my grandma just has this kind of habit where she worries about like all her kids. So now that like everyone was back home, my dad would go out to visit friends and she would be like, why are you going out so late? Like, why aren't you back home? Why aren't you like, staying home? And it was just funny to watch his reactions to it
Yeah.
because he's like, Mom, like, how old am I? And I'm like, those are things that I've said when I go back home. So it was definitely interesting to see those dynamics.
Yeah, it reminds me of like the work that we do with students, how they're out on their own at post-secondary education, and then they come home for Thanksgiving or come home for Christmas. And meanwhile, they've been out running their social life, and then now they're home that the parents kind of expect them to check in and almost like have a curfew again when they've been like living independently for 4 months.
Yeah, no, the amount of times I've told my own parents this, it's like I live away from home and like I have for university as well. And they never check up when I was there. It was like I was doing things as for like my own terms, just taking care of myself. But like suddenly, if I'll come back for the holidays or visit and I go out, it's like, oh, I need to know you're safe and you're back home. And I'm like, what? It's just,
Yeah, I've been safe this whole time. I know. I think it's
yeah,
kind of like out of sight, out of mind sometimes where parents can let go, but then once their children are back in kind of their vision, then all of the old feelings come up. Yeah, for
yeah,
me, I'm like the youngest of three. So if I go back home, it's like I'm this like ambitious, successful woman, and then I'm back at home with my brothers, and it's like I'm the baby of the family again. I mean, that's really changed over the years, but in a broad sense, it's like all of the old feelings and thoughts come up. I think for some people we work with, it's quite painful. I
mhm,
think Christmas is hard. We didn't really talk a lot about this towards the end of last year, but I think there's always such also a heightening over the Christmas holidays. I was thinking about this the other day that sometimes it's an increase of alcohol. There seems to be
mhm,
a running theme of that where if there's a lot of parties or a lot of dinners or a lot of events that are getting hosted. And then there's all these like narratives around alcohol and the
mhm.
holidays, whether it's Christmas or Christmas Eve or New Year's Eve. And I'm sure you're seeing this with your clients as well, where even just the addition of the added or extra alcohol just adds a whole layer of drama to what we're already talking about, which
Yeah.
is these reversion of the old dynamics. In some ways, it's almost like a perfect storm, isn't it?
Absolutely. And I actually saw something online the other day where it said like Christmas to some is an occasion that's endured rather than enjoyed.
Oh,
And yeah, it just automatically, like even when with clients or even some friends that I have, it does get brought up where going back home for the holidays isn't really as joyous as like they expect it to be. But I think they just going back home, they think of all those warm feelings growing up, sitting around the Christmas tree, opening up gifts, and then that's like that expectation going into it. But then it's like so much has changed, and now like in going into adolescence or adult life, going back home isn't always the same because of those changes.
yeah. And I think that makes the grief harder because
Mhm.
I think in addition to the alcohol are these expectations of what it's supposed to be like.
Yes.
And we see that a lot with a lot of different events in our clients' lives. It reminds me of like what new mothers go through because there's all this
Mhm.
like expectations of
Yes.
sometimes how the media portrays motherhood, and it's supposed to be kind of like sitting with a coddling a baby, and
Hmm.
and then it ends up being more about sleep deprivation and stress and even postpartum depression. But there's all these expectations, I think, that sometimes come with the holidays, so that when it isn't how it looks like it's supposed to be, I think the pain is even greater, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So it's this perfect storm in some ways, and the grief that gets opened up almost where we don't even recognize ourselves anymore. Or we get disappointed
Mhm.
by how our family members are acting or not acting. And then there's this like dichotomy between what you wanted it to be or needed it to be or expected it to be, and then how it actually plays out.
Like that.
So I think now, as we're into the first week of January, we're seeing a lot of the aftermath of what happened during the
Hmm.
holidays for people and kind of the pain and grief that comes up for that. So sometimes there's just higher levels of conflict, grief, regression if there's alcohol misuse, and then all of the pain of how that's playing out. So let's talk about kind of what we're doing to help, because in some ways it's not really different than what we look at with clients in terms of how when there's pain, there's opportunity. And the universe kind of delivers things to us on a silver platter of what the problems are. And as painful as it is, it's like every time there's that painful experience, it's like if we're open to understanding the purpose of it, then it's actually an opportunity to grow. And I think Christmas is kind of like that. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I agree. I definitely think in a way it is an opportunity to grow. And especially like if you look at it as some clients where maybe they've had like a lot of conflict in families growing up, and then they still do these big, like large Christmas gatherings, and the conflict is still kind of there. But I think with our work, especially and in speaking with clients, it's that opportunity for self awareness to really decide how much of what we're feeling and our emotions do we want to like give in to, the family conflicts, or like how siblings are reacting to us, and that self-awareness piece on like, do I really want to give so much control to like all of this conflict and the family to kind of affect my mood during like the holiday season, and kind of just even like you said, going back into like adopting old roles as well. It's like, how much do I want to go back and just do everything that I used to do? And like, if someone's asking me to do something, do I just do it? Or do I have those healthy boundaries where I'm like, maybe things were a certain way at that point of time and growing up, but now I'm, a grown adult and things don't work like that for me anymore. So really also like having that self-awareness and setting those healthy boundaries, even if it is with family during these times.
Yeah, yeah. What I'd like to think is that even though it may feel like sometimes like a slap in the face to get this reminder of what is kind of happening in our families of origin, I'd like to think that we can use it for that self-awareness. Like it's kind of like what Oprah says, we should create like uh-oh moments, right? Like,
Mhm.
aha, now I get it, right?
Yeah.
Because the more connections we can make between kind of what we were exposed to growing up and then how things play out for us now in our life, because oftentimes I think half the battle is just knowing why something is happening the way it is. Because obviously self-awareness goes such a long way towards kind of understanding ourselves, because it's like if we
Mhm.
don't understand it, then we can't do anything about it, right?
Yeah.
So
And I think
hmm, go ahead.
no, sorry. Another thing like I notice is in terms of the self-awareness, there's that constant battle between like, do I go into this family gathering where I know there may be conflicts or certain feelings that come up, or do I stay away from everything and then those feelings of loneliness come up where I'm not
Oh,
doing anything during the holidays and I'm kind of just sitting alone. So I think I've noticed that as well, that constant inner battle, like between, how much do I not want to be alone, but how much energy do I really want to spend engaging in like that family dynamic?
I know. And some people get really creative, right? Where
Mhm.
they find other things to do at Christmas, because sometimes the pain, it isn't just like an argument or
Yeah.
kind of a regression, like you're saying with your grandmother worried about your father going out.
Mhm.
It sometimes takes on a whole much more serious
Yes.
level where it can even be unsafe to go home. So people
Yeah.
need to kind of figure out that it's that saying like bad company's worse than no company. So trying to reframe that aloneness isn't lonely, that it's actually part of that boundary
Mhm.
of finding a new way, it's kind of like, how that new term started popping up around Thanksgiving, around Friendsgiving,
Oh,
and
yes.
where
Yeah.
people decided that going home for Thanksgiving wasn't really what they wanted to do, that it's kind of like this chosen family of friends. And that ended up leading to that whole term getting coined around Friendsgiving. And I don't know, I haven't heard a similar term around Christmas or the holidays, but there probably is one in the making if we haven't already heard it. But yeah, sometimes it is about reframing that aloneness,
Mhm.
because it's about kind of being empowered to decide who you really do want to spend time with and where you want to put your energy. But I'd like to think that if people are going home or went home and then it went badly, that like anything else, it can serve to improve their self-awareness, to understanding themselves
Mhm.
better, because oftentimes we'll project that family of origin dynamic somewhere else in our life,
Mhm.
whether it's with work or friends or partners. And it's about kind of being reminded of how things played out and the influence that had on us. So it actually can be maybe clarifying or validating, and then ultimately empowering about why we do or don't do some of the things in our life once we have had that kind of reminder of where we came from. I think it can be empowering, though it's painful.
Yeah, no, I like the way you phrase that. That's a really good thought.
Yeah. The second thing I heard you talk about was motivate, because I think once we have those aha moments, we do want to kind of see ourselves in a choice position, even if we understand what isn't possible. Because oftentimes, if we're visiting family at Christmas, the dynamics are sometimes quite fixed, where there has been a lack of change. So
Mhm.
even though it may help us understand ourselves better, ultimately it's about what can I do in my life now to make it better? Because it doesn't have to be just a straight projection of those dynamics. You know, if we aren't living at home, we have the emotional and physical space with the self-awareness to actually decide what we want to do differently in our families or in our friend groups that may be better than what was possible growing up,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm.
So I think we can use that self-awareness for motivation. And that's what we try to do in terms of looking at specific ways. I think it'll always have that aha moment of like having our wounded self be activated in our
Yeah.
life, but it's kind of like deciding that we have choice
Mhm.
where maybe we didn't have that as children, right?
Yeah, and I think that's a good point, like with the wounded and healthy self, especially going along the lines of our previous podcast with the resolution and starting off the new year, kind of taking that. And I think when, we do go back home, a lot of what comes out is that aspects of our wounded self, whether that's growing up or things that happen in our childhood. And then, like you said, when that aha moment happens, it kind of helps you reflect back on that healthy self. How have I like kind of been overcoming the wounded self in certain areas in my life, and how can I take this forward? So definitely like what you're saying on this.
Yeah, I think it's a bit of a secret recipe where like we do see higher levels of grief when there have been painful dynamics we were
Mhm.
exposed to over the holidays. But it's kind of like, how do I kind of facilitate that grief without indulging it? And so it's kind of like having that moment to grieve what isn't possible without it taking us down, because obviously grief can get complicated, and then complicated grief can become like an episode of depression. So we often will see those higher levels. So I think we have to work really hard to find that recipe where it's like we honor our grief of what we witnessed or
Mhm.
experienced over the holidays, so that because you can't really avoid it. You can't, it just gets bigger, but somehow
Bigger.
it's about dipping into it without it letting it kind of overcome us. It's not easy to do.
Yeah. And even the piece on grief, like I think the holidays also bring up this time where if you've lost a loved one to death or in divorce or parents have separated, I think a lot of grief also comes up during that time, especially around the holidays as well. So you're right, like really tuning in on that and like how do we kind of take that grief as well and accept it and
Yeah, yeah,
move
we
forward.
haven't talked a lot about this, but with grief, there's oftentimes those anniversaries. And I think
Yes.
for a lot of people, Christmas was fraught with a lot of conflict, sometimes even violence, addiction.
Mhm.
And so even going into the holidays, I haven't even gone home yet, and my heart is already bleeding from the
Yeah.
memory of what past Christmases were like. And then it evokes all of those senses of loss of
Mhm.
what wasn't possible years gone by. And also, yeah, if you've lost somebody to death, then Christmas takes on a whole other meaning, or the holidays. I
Mhm.
saw a lot in the social media leading up to Christmas about what it's like to go into the holidays when you don't have that significant other, and whether it's about bad memories of Christmases gone by, or somehow getting through the holidays when there's almost like a hole in your heart
Mhm.
because you're not with the person that meant so much to you. and people
Yeah.
really needing to find kind of oftentimes creative ways of finding some sense of peace, even though, you know, that person is no longer living. It's a really, there's a lot of complicating factors that start to play out. So I think what we really want to pay attention to, because these gifts that we didn't expect to get, so sometimes we see it coming over the holidays. Sometimes there are those anniversaries. Sometimes there is that sense of hyper grief. And other times it's surprising to us how we started acting over the holidays or how we started feeling. So I like this idea of helping the clients we work with increase their level of self-awareness, but then ultimately, what I was saying a few minutes ago is, what do we do now? So I really think it's time to dig in, right? To really dig into ourselves with a new year starting, with any information that kind of was gathered over the holidays, sometimes to make a deeper commitment to ourselves
Mhm.
about how we want to be doing things in our own life. So it's like, how do we want to think about our losses, or how do we want to think about the role we played in our family? Sometimes people are peacekeepers, sometimes people are enablers, sometimes
Mhm.
people are the caregivers. I mean, all kinds of roles start playing
Nice. Yeah.
out. So I think, you know, it's about digging into the new year, taking not just like those heartfelt ideas about what happened in 2022, but maybe even honing in a bit on what did happen over the holidays. How does
Mhm.
that inform us? Whether we call it a resolution or not, it is a new year. And it's kind of like, what do we want to do with this year?
For sure.
Yeah, so it's kind of an exciting time, and taking kind of the pain of the holidays. And I don't mean to be a downer. I mean, often, obviously, there were some good things that happened over the holidays, but what we're talking about today. So let's take this conversation and move it forward for our clients. Let's dedicate to looking at grief, at what the stories of the grief are. Let's help people find that secret recipe between
Mhm.
experiencing the grief, allowing the feelings of it without indulging it, but finding that secret recipe. So what I really want to highlight from what I'm hearing you say today around self-awareness, around
Mhm.
finding the motivation, and the last thing you talked about was boundaries, right?
Yes.
About, because sometimes boundaries means I don't go home. Sometimes boundaries means I only go home for a short period of time. Sometimes boundary means I will use all of the work that I've been doing on myself to practice myself differently at home.
Mhm.
But ultimately, it means kind of like, what boundaries do I need to set up in my life to break intergenerational patterns of trauma or addiction? Because otherwise, the risk is that we just carry it forward.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yes. I think those healthy boundaries really, it kind of, having those boundaries helps you show up as your best self, whether that's with family or just friends or any relationships. Really, having your own self-awareness and healthy boundaries kind of helps the other person understand what are you okay and not okay with, and then kind of, hopefully they're able to understand and accept that.
Yeah, because ultimately it's about living consciously, right? And if
Yes.
we got a heavy dose of consciousness over the holidays, maybe that is the gift. So then we can make some better decisions this year for ourselves. So that's
Hmm.
the work we need to do. So let's dig in and let's help people kind of accept these gifts from the holidays and figure out what to do about them. So thanks for coming in, and we'll see you again soon. Bye.
Thanks, Karen. Bye.